And next, it's me, Axios One Big Thing host, Niala Boodhoo.
How are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Niala Boodhoo, as you just heard. I'm the host and editor of the Axios One Big Thing podcast, where I talk to leaders shaping conversations in business, politics, and culture. And I'm so pleased to let you all know that this next conversation will be broadcast on this week's podcast. So thank you for being part of not just being here for the AI Summit, but being part of our live audience for this next segment. And by the way, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. One Big Thing, this episode will be out tomorrow. Now to our guest. For more than 35 years, the Robin Hood Foundation has provided millions of dollars of grants to fight poverty in New York. Now, the organization, famous for using investment principles to fight poverty, is enlisting AI in the fight. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, Rich Buery.
Niala, how are you?
Rich.
How are you doing?
Good.
All right.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the big picture. When we're thinking about the U.S. our economy, on paper, it looks really good right now. If you think about unemployment rates, inflation easing somewhat, from your perspective, how does that look for people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder?
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. As you said, if you look at many of the indicators of the economy is coming back strong. But unfortunately, that progress masks the deep inequities that underlie our economy, which existed before the pandemic and which persist during this recovery. So, at Robin Hood, as you mentioned, our mission is to fight poverty in New York City. We want to create lifelines to economic opportunity for those that have been left out of the economic mainstream here in New York City. And what we see in New York City is that, indeed, over the past several years, poverty has become both larger and more intense. We do a survey every year called the Poverty Tracker, which tracks the experience of low-income New Yorkers. And what we saw in the most recent year, that the number of people living in poverty increased by 500,000, from 1.5 million to 2 million New Yorkers living in poverty. 25% of all children in New York City live in poverty. And indeed, even that number understates the problem, because even if you earn double that amount, if you live 200% of the poverty line in New York,
What is that?
you are still $88,000 for a family of four, using something called the supplemental poverty measure, which is a more robust measure of poverty. If you earn $88,000 for a family of four in New York, you are twice as likely to struggle paying the bills, to have to make a choice between paying rent or seeking health care or buying food. And that is the majority of New Yorkers. So in some ways, the city looks strong, but that strength hides deep inequities. You talk about unemployment. Yeah, the unemployment rate in New York has really rebounded, but for Black New Yorkers, the poverty rate is about 3 times the poverty rate of white New Yorkers. So we continue to be in a moment where those who are at the margins of the economy are continuing to struggle.
And so you all have opened an AI poverty challenge that will provide 3 $1 million grants. What's the hope with that?
So for us, when we think about what does it take to move people out of poverty, the things that make the difference between opportunity and not have access to opportunity are things like education, like you have access to a great education. Do you have access to high-paying jobs that are going to allow you to sustain your family? Do you have access to basic financial support so that you have housing and food and the things that provide stability so that you can build a better future for yourself? Do you have access to capital that you need to buy a home or to invest in your future? All of these things are parts of the economy that are deeply disrupted and impacted by artificial intelligence. So as an organization whose mission is to fight poverty, we have to be an organization whose mission is to think about how do these emerging technologies, how are they going to impact those living in poverty? And one of the things that we as an organization have tried to understand more about how these things intersect, every time you hear about AI, you sort of hear about this very bipolar view of the world. Either everything's going to be Eden and Nirvana, or everything's going to be Skynet and devastation. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately, like any other thing that happens in our world, whether AI will be a force for good, whether it's a force that unleashes opportunity, or whether it's a force that ossifies inequity, is going to be determined by what people do. What are the choices we make? And so for us, this AI Opportunity Challenge is one way to put the call out to all the incredible people out in the world, including the technologists that are building the future, to ask them, what would it take to build tools that ensure that AI is truly a tool for opportunity and not only a tool to retrench inequality?
So actually next week on the podcast, my guest is Reshma Saujani, the founder of Girls Who Code and Moms First. And we're actually going to be talking about how much the narrative around AI is causing fear or hindering people in the same way that she saw with young women and people of color who were originally left out of careers in high tech. From you, where you sit, do you think this is actually happening with AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of what happens is when you lead with a narrative that says either everything is going to be great or everything's going to be horrible, what that does is it removes any need for agency. It means that why engage when it doesn't matter what's going to happen? And so I think part of the message is to reinforce that it does matter what happens. It matters what we do. We can sort of decide the future that we're building together. And the part of the challenge in terms of what's happening with the economy right now is that the people who are most vulnerable are just disconnected from these decisions about what's going to happen with our economy. They're disconnected from what's happening with AI. We in New York City, a city which has made incredible strides in terms of internet access, in a place like the South Bronx, 40% of families do not have access to high-speed internet. Everybody's probably seen the news about the American Connectivity Program, a pandemic-era policy which is designed to connect people to high-speed internet around the country. Tens of millions of Americans are at risk of losing high-speed internet as that money disappears. So what is underlying all of this is that people who stand to win or lose, the voices of the low-income population are just not part of this conversation. And so one of the things that really drives our thinking is, how do we center those living in poverty? How do they become a part of building the future? How do we make sure that we're building tools that are actually responsive to the needs of people living in poverty so that AI can be a force for good and not a force to further inequality?
So how are you already seeing this happen? Like, what are examples of where you're seeing this when it comes to your work?
Yeah, we're really fortunate that we're investing in some really amazing organizations and programs, and I do think that the theme of many of them is how do we connect people to decision making? How do we get these tools in the hands of people so that people have an opportunity to build what they need? So one partnership that we just announced yesterday that we're really excited about is a partnership with Tech NYC Foundation, which is really trying to address the problem of nonprofit organizations in New York, all of whom hear every day, you got to be using AI, you got to be using AI. But what does that mean? How do I use AI?
And how do they start?
How do you start? How do you understand the use cases? How do you understand how these emerging technologies can actually make a difference for the way that you work or the people that you serve? So we're really excited about this partnership, and the idea is to activate Tech NYC's network of 700 plus tech industries in New York, and to connect them with organizations, schools, nonprofits that are on the front lines of meeting the needs of those living in poverty, to help them understand what are the use cases, how can you improve your service delivery. Another example that I'm really excited about is PlayLab AI. This is a national nonprofit that again is trying to connect people who work with children to these AI tools. And basically what PlayLab AI does is it creates a space where teachers can come together in learning communities and play with ChatGPT, play with Claude, play with these tools, and think about how do we build tools that solve the needs of my students in my classrooms. Things like building a chatbot to help parents whose kids are absent from school to engage them to address chronic absenteeism. Tools that are helping to provide formative assessments in real time for essay writing in a way that leverages the skills that a teacher wants to give, but can give that feedback much more quickly than the teacher would have to do if they had to read 60 essays. But again, not having corporate executives decide what people need, but actually having the people that we want to use these tools decide what they need. One of the things that we do at Robinhood is a team called Blue Ridge Labs. It's essentially an incubator for technology-enabled solutions to poverty. And central to our work at Blue Ridge Labs is something called the Design Insight Group, which is a group of New Yorkers with lived experience of poverty who provide feedback to these tech founders about the tools that they're creating to help solve their needs. They help set priorities, they provide feedback to founders, they do early product testing. You know, one of the things that we always used to hear at Blue Ridge Labs when people wanted to come and sort of create financial tools for people living in poverty is they would say, well, I'm going to help you create a budgeting tool. We got a lot of information about budgeting tools. But when you talk to people in the Design Insight Group, the DIG, they'll tell you, we don't need budgeting tools. I'm a ninja with the budget. I can make a dollar stretch more than you could ever tell me how to make a dollar stretch. What I need help with is how to understand what my SNAP benefit balance looks like and how do I actually maximize those benefits. What foods are eligible for WIC? One of the programs that we're funding through Blue Ridge Labs that I'm really excited about is something called claimant.us, which is essentially, it's almost like a co-pilot for social workers, right? Like, so the idea is if you're eligible for medical benefits, for just medical disability benefits, it's really complicated. We know that nationally, any given year, 3.5 million Americans who are eligible for those benefits don't get it, at a loss of about $3.5 billion a year. $300 billion a year. In New York alone, we're talking about $3.5 billion in lost benefits. But what Claimant is trying to do is to pull up people's medical records, evaluate what benefits they're eligible for, turn that into an application, and to really improve the process of applying for and appealing denial of benefits. But these are all real-world solutions that are driven by actual people's needs. You know, one of the, it's almost a cliche in our world to speak about proximity, that people who are closest to the problem are the best positioned to solve it.
But I think you're probably hearing such amazing stories, right? Like when you're saying these people, like what to your mind, like what stands out? Like I think that's a very vivid example of the SNAP benefits. Like when you think back to these conversations, what stands out from what people have said to these tech founders about what they need?
Well, part of it is the excitement and the joy of people thinking about how to center their challenges. And I think we're all so used to living in a world where things are done to us. And I think what we hear from DIG members is the joy of being empowered, of being asked, what is your life really like? What do you need? What would it take to be able to move your family from a place of vulnerability to a place of stability, ultimately to a place of wealth building and opportunity? And so it's really everybody wins, of course. The founders win, and sometimes these are for-profit, sometimes they're non-profits, but they win because they're building products that people actually need. But there's a tremendous sense of empowerment to the people in our DIG who understand that they're being treated like experts in the realm of expertise. And I think the whole city wins, the whole world wins, and we can have more development happen that way.
So to your mind, you see AI's best use case for your work as empowering?
It's incredibly empowering. I mean, so I think one of the things that, you know, as I said before, people either have a very optimistic view of this or a very pessimistic view.
Is it too simplistic?
It's way too simplistic. And I'll admit, I'm an optimist by nature, and I think there's good reason to be an optimist when it comes to the power of technology to transform lives. We've seen over the last 200 years, the percentage of people in the world who live in abject poverty have gone from 80% to 10%. A lot of that is driven by technological innovations in agriculture and housing and food. So it is good to be optimistic. But that doesn't just happen. It will happen if people make the choice to center the needs of all Americans, all people in the world, when they're deciding how to build and implement these tools. And so I'm optimistic, but I'm optimistic in part because I get to spend my time working with these incredible leaders and entrepreneurs who are really trying to solve the world's problems. And so if we can empower those people and empower the people that they're trying to serve, I'm very bullish on the future.
At Axios, we like to end on one fun thing. So, Rich, you just had your foundation's annual fundraising gala in May. It was Matrix themed. How did you guys went all out for this? How'd you come up with that?
Oh, well, we always go all out. But, it came out of our work with AI. In February, we had a summit on AI and poverty. Again, we talked about the negative. It made us think about, well, The Matrix. Hard to think of a movie more about the harms of AI run amok. And so, we asked the crowd at our benefit the blue pill, to take the blue pill, and to take the pathway to solving problems. And we raised $58.5 million for New Yorkers in need that night. It's a lot, thank you. It's a lot of money, but it only scratches the surface of need. And so we need more than philanthropy. We need businesses, we need civil society, we need government to all come together and to put Americans, put low-income New Yorkers, put people across the world who are suffering first. If we do that, again, there's no limit to what we can do.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I think that's a very good place to end. The CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, Rich Buery. Thank you so much.
Good to talk to you.